The Cthar Dominion stood as the galaxy's most formidable empire. Their ships were massive and their strategies legendary. Each admiral, a master tactician, whose mind could predict the outcome of any battle before it began among them, was Ilkar, the youngest admiral to ever hold command of the Dominion's most advanced fleet. Known for his cold intellect and unshakable confidence, Ilkar had never met a challenge he couldn't conquer. When an invitation arrived to compete in the Galactic Starship simulator, he regarded it as little more than a diversion, a contest of mere gamesmanship, where he would easily outmaneuver his opponents, especially the humans who were renowned for their reckless combat style. He had heard of Captain Cole and his human fleet, but dismissing them as amateurs, Ilkar prepared his forces in the simulator, expecting little more than a test of his own skills. The simulator was unlike any other. It was a fully immersive system designed to replicate real-life space combat, with the added twist that it could adapt to the player's strategies in real time. The result was an ever-evolving battlefield that pushed its participants to the limits of their abilities. Each species involved had its own fleet with unique strengths and weaknesses. The Cthar, for example, specialized in overwhelming firepower and precise coordination, a strategy that had served them well for centuries. But Ilkar knew that the true beauty of the simulator lay in how it revealed the gaps in each species' tactical approaches. As the simulation began, Ilkar took immediate control of his fleet. The massive warships surged forward in perfect unison, each movement a testament to Cthar precision, their weapons charged and ready, their shields impenetrable. He smiled as he watched his opponent's fleet approach, a ragtag group of human ships, barely worthy of notice. Their formations were sloppy, their movements erratic. Yet Ilkar had seen this before. Humans lacked the discipline of the Cthar, but they made up for it with sheer tenacity and creativity, or so the legend said. The battle started in typical fashion. Ilkar's ships immediately took the offensive, launching salvo after salvo at the human fleet, who tried to scatter and evade. But it was a standard tactic, one Ilkar had faced countless times before. There was no real threat in the human response. He noted with satisfaction that their ships had no clear formations. They seemed to be acting on pure instinct and desperation, which was a foolish way to fight on a battlefield governed by logic and calculation. But then something unexpected happened. One of the human ships made a sharp turn, a movement so unpredictable it threw off the targeting systems of Ilkar's flagship. His sensors flickered and recalibrated in disbelief. How could such a chaotic maneuver break his perfect lock? The human ship twisted in ways that defied Ilkar's assumptions. It weaved through the assault with impossible agility, dodging attacks by a hair's breadth. Ilkar's brow furrowed. This was no random accident. The human fleet was reacting not in the way any conventional force would, yet somehow their ships were surviving against impossible odds. His flagship released a series of pulse beams in a targeted strike against one of the human vessels, but it dodged at the last moment, like it knew exactly where the beams would land, as if it had anticipated the move before he had even made it. The Admiral's mind raced, calculating possible outcomes, yet none of his predictions held. The human fleet was forcing him to adapt in ways he had never expected. He adjusted his strategy on the fly, sending more ships to flank the humans, but again they evaded his efforts without warning, and the humans struck back with swift counterattacks that were as relentless as they were unpredictable. For the first time in his career, Ilkar found himself questioning his own certainty in the outcome of a battle. The battle raged on, and Ilkar's frustration grew with every passing moment. The human fleet refused to follow the patterns he had come to expect. Instead of retreating when the situation seemed hopeless, they pressed forward, launching sudden offensive strikes with reckless abandon, as if they thrived in chaos. His ships were powerful and precise, but their predictable movements were being shattered by the humans' impossible flexibility. One of his cruisers was hit by a barrage of laser fire from a human ship that seemed to appear from nowhere. It wasn't supposed to be there. How had they gotten past his defenses? Ilkar's mind raced, his eyes flicking across the simulation's tactical display, recalibrating his fleet's formations once again. But each time the humans adapted faster than his ships could react. The human ships were not stronger nor faster than his own, but they had something far more dangerous. They were unpredictable, a quality Ilkar had never encountered in battle before. He had trained for years to face the precision of Victhar's enemies, from the structured Vornath to the highly disciplined Archai, but nothing had prepared him for this raw creative energy that emanated from the human fleet. Captain Cole seemed to be everywhere. At once his movements on the battlefield were erratic yet deliberate. His ships seemed to dance between his fleet's attacks, as if they were guided by some unseen force. Every time Ilkar thought he had the upper hand, Cole would change course, shift direction, and attack from a different angle. It was maddening. Ilkar ordered his ships into tighter formations, hoping to corner the humans, but it was like trying to trap a lightning bolt. He had seen humans operate before during training simulations, but this was different. It felt like they were experimenting in real time, pushing boundaries, testing the very limits of what the simulator could handle. He watched as another human ship broke free from a tight formation and made a daring escape right through a gap between two of his destroyers, a maneuver that should have been impossible, yet somehow it worked. The human ship zipped through unscathed before turning to engage a new target. The simulator's AI adjusted to the humans' tactics as though it were learning their strategies faster than Ilkar could process them. It was as if the very system was evolving alongside the humans, adapting to their unpredictable ways. Just when he thought he had figured out their pattern, the human fleet would change it again. Ilkar's tactical superiority began to crumble. His fleet was slowly being whittled down piece by piece, each attack by the humans more daring than the last. With every strike, his ships were forced into unfamiliar positions, places he had never anticipated. His mind raced, trying to outthink them, but the humans weren't playing by the same rules. His own rules were irrelevant in this strange new game. His flagship took a direct hit from a hidden human ship that emerged from behind a debris field. It wasn't a direct shot at first, but a series of calculated distractions designed to throw off his focus. Ilkar's heart quickened as he watched the damage spread across his ship's hull. The humans weren't just surviving, they were controlling the flow of the battle, and the longer it went on, the more Ilkar realized they were enjoying it. They were thriving in the chaos. Where his fleet's precision faltered, theirs only grew sharper in contrast. With a sense of growing unease, Ilkar ordered a retreat, yet the humans pursued relentlessly. There was no surrender in their tactics, no desire to fall back or regroup. They fought until every last ship had been accounted for, and in that moment Ilkar realized something profound about the humans. They didn't play the game to win, they played to break the rules. And in doing so, they had already achieved something no one could have predicted. They had forced him to evolve. The retreat was hardly a victory, but Ilkar had no choice. His fleet had suffered significant losses, far more than he had anticipated. As the battle simulation ended, the screen flickered, displaying a post-battle analysis. The human fleet had sustained fewer casualties than his own, and the remaining ships had practically decimated his forces with sheer unpredictability. Ilkar sat silently, staring at the data, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what had just occurred. The humans had turned his understanding of warfare upside down, and now he found himself questioning everything he knew about combat. He quickly initiated a new round, determined to correct his mistakes. This time, he would not underestimate them. But the moment the battle began, something strange happened. The humans didn't repeat their previous tactics. Instead, they seemed to be experimenting again, probing his fleet for weaknesses. The human ships moved with the same wild abandon, yes, but now they were also weaving subtle traps, baiting him into pursuing them down false avenues. It was as though they were studying him, adapting to his responses just as he had tried to adapt to theirs. They were not simply fighting, they were learning. Ilkar ground his teeth, frustration rising. How could they be this unpredictable? It was as if the human fleet was alive, constantly evolving. Every move he made, every strategy he employed, seemed to play into their hands. He had always prided himself on his ability to anticipate the enemy's next step, but the humans didn't seem to follow any logical progression. They thrived on chaos, on making the unpredictable seem like the only logical outcome. This wasn't just a game to them. This was something else entirely. In a moment of desperation, Ilkar called for a full-scale offensive, hoping that overwhelming force would crush the human fleet's wild tactics. He commanded his ships to focus on sheer firepower, sweeping through the battlefield with relentless precision. The human ships scattered, dodging and evading in a manner that was almost maddening, as though they were taunting him. But one human ship, smaller than his own, flew directly into the heart of the assault, weaving through his ships like a needle threading through fabric. Ilkar's flagship released a barrage of plasma beams, but they all missed, striking only empty space where the human ship had just been. A flash of light appeared, and before Ilkar could react, the human ship launched a devastating counterattack, exploiting the very gap he had left open in his formation. The flagship's shields were pierced, and a series of explosions shook the ship's interior. For the first time, Ilkar felt genuine fear. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't a mistake. The human ship had seen his weakness and had exploited it with perfect timing. The human's ability to improvise, to respond faster than the simulator could process, was unlike anything he had ever encountered. As the human ship disengaged, Ilkar realized that their strategy was not just about surviving. It was about finding the unexpected path, the one that no one else could see. Humans didn't rely on brute force alone, or on careful planning. They thrived on intuition, on finding the most unlikely solution in the most impossible circumstances. It wasn't about following the rules, it was about rewriting them. His fleet was now in disarray, forced to defend against multiple unpredictable strikes. Ilkar, his mind racing, tried to process everything he had learned so far. The humans were not following the standard playbook. They were rewriting the very essence of how battles should be fought. And in doing so, they were challenging everything the Cathar Dominion had built its reputation on. If this was how humans fought, imaginative, relentless, and capable of thinking in ways that defied logic, then how could the Dominion ever hope to defeat them? Ilkar's ships continued to fall, and with each new loss, the Admiral's pride shattered a little more. The humans had proven one thing with absolute certainty. This was no game. This was a glimpse into the future of war itself, a future where chaos wasn't just something to survive. It was the key to victory. Ilkar's mind raced as the simulation continued, his once flawless fleet now a shadow of its former strength. He watched helplessly as one after another, his ships fell to the relentless assault of the human fleet. Each strike seemed more creative, more daring than the last, as though Captain Cole and his crew had mastered the art of turning the unpredictable into an advantage. It was clear now that this was not just a game of tactics. It was something far deeper, a reflection of humanity's raw ingenuity and willpower. The Admiral sat back in his command chair, staring at the simulation's feedback screen. His fleet had suffered irreparable damage. The human ships had been damaged as well, but the gap was closing, and with each passing moment, it became more apparent that the humans weren't just surviving. They were adapting faster than his Cathar fleet could respond. This wasn't a contest of firepower or precision. It was a contest of survival instincts, creativity, and sheer resilience. Ilkar ran his fingers through his furrowed brow, his mind trying to make sense of what had just transpired. He had long been proud of the Cathar's efficiency, their ability to conquer any enemy with carefully executed plans. But in this simulation, the human fleet had thrown that idea into disarray. The humans weren't bound by the same rigid strategies that the Cathar had relied on for centuries. They didn't follow the rules, because to them, the rules were only limits to be shattered. It was as though the humans were playing a different game entirely, one where their strength wasn't in the technology or firepower they wielded, but in their capacity to think beyond the confines of traditional combat. And that, Ilkar realized with a growing sense of unease, made them more dangerous than anything he had ever faced. As the battle drew to a close, Ilkar initiated another round, determined not to make the same mistakes. This time, however, he had a different approach in mind. He would need to rethink his strategy. He needed to adapt. But how could he do so when the human fleet was no longer bound by anything resembling predictability? It was clear that the Kthar's reliance on precision and forethought was irrelevant in the face of such raw unpredictability. The simulation restarted, and Ilkar gave his fleet new orders. He would focus on creating traps, using the environment to his advantage, and applying pressure at multiple angles. It was a gamble, a break from tradition, but the Admiral was determined to turn the tide. But as soon as the battle began, the humans proved to be one step ahead. Captain Cole's fleet split into smaller groups, almost as though they were testing Ilkar's defenses. They kept their movements fluid, bouncing between positions, never allowing Ilkar to corner them. They made calculated retreats, only to strike from another direction moments later. It was as though they were studying him, pushing him to think faster, to react instinctively. Ilkar's ships closed in on one of the smaller human fleets, a group of ships that appeared isolated and vulnerable. He saw an opportunity, a rare opening, and he ordered his ships to engage with full force. But as soon as his fleet closed in, the humans detonated a series of small explosive devices hidden in the debris field, creating a wall of debris that scattered his ships and blocked his targeting systems. The human fleet, meanwhile, moved swiftly through the chaos, slipping past the Kthar fleet with uncanny precision. For the first time in his life, Ilkar felt the humbling sting of defeat. He watched helplessly as his forces, the pinnacle of Kthar military might, struggled to even land a single decisive blow. The human fleet was elusive, unpredictable, and their capacity for chaos had become their greatest weapon. The simulation came to a halt, the AI voice announcing the end of the session. But Ilkar's mind was far from the end. He felt the weight of the loss, but it wasn't the damage to his fleet that troubled him most. It was the realization that the humans were not fighting by any code he understood. They weren't playing to win. They were playing to break the game itself, to find ways to outthink their opponent in ways that defied all logic. In that moment, Ilkar knew something he had never considered before. The humans had changed the game, and perhaps for the first time in his life, Ilkar was the one who had to learn how to adapt. Ilkar sat in stunned silence, staring at the now empty simulation space. His mind, usually a well-oiled machine, felt like it had ground to a halt. The battle had ended, but the fight was far from over. He had never faced an adversary like this before. For the first time, the Admiral was forced to confront the uncomfortable truth. Human ingenuity was not something to be dismissed or underestimated. It was something to be feared. The data from the previous round filled the screen. The numbers were stark. The Kthar fleet had suffered another crushing defeat. The humans had lost fewer ships, and even more concerning, they had inflicted damage in ways that defied Ilkar's understanding of warfare. The damage wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The human fleet had forced him into a corner, forcing him to make choices he never thought he would have to make. For a moment, he had been unsure of himself. He had doubted his own skills, something that had never happened before in his career. Ilkar took a deep breath and pushed back from his console, standing to pace around the room. The simulator's AI continued to replay moments from the battle, but he couldn't look at it anymore. It was useless to analyze what had already been done. The questions were different now. How did they do it? What made them so unpredictable? And most importantly, how could he counter it? He was no longer playing to win. The goal had shifted. Now it was about survival. Survival on the battlefield, and survival as a strategist. He could not afford another failure. The Kthar were proud of their military doctrine, of their strategic superiority. To lose to the humans, again and again, would be a blow to that reputation, a blow that could not be ignored. Ilkar returned to his station and quickly initiated another round. This time, he wasn't just commanding ships to fight. This time, he was going to learn. He would learn what it was that made the humans so different, so unpredictable. As the simulation began, he focused less on the battle and more on observing the human fleet's movements, trying to dissect every decision, every shift in tactics, and most importantly, the humans' willingness to break the rules. Captain Cole's fleet didn't disappoint. The humans launched their ships in a scattershot pattern, almost aimless at first. But then Ilkar saw it. Every ship was moving independently, but there was an underlying synchronization to their movements, like each ship was anticipating the next. They weren't just acting randomly. They were acting with purpose, but without the rigidity that Ilkar's own fleet adhered to. The humans didn't fight to follow a plan. They fought to stay ahead of one. Ilkar watched in awe as a human destroyer, seemingly cornered, used its smaller size to its advantage, darting between larger starships, narrowly avoiding destruction. But this time, Ilkar didn't rush to destroy it. He watched its every move. He could see that Captain Cole was setting a trap. The human ships had been drawing him in, pushing him to think that he had them cornered. But now, it was clear. The trap had been set for him. In that moment, the Admiral understood. The human fleet wasn't simply reacting to his moves. They were predicting his responses, then turning those predictions against him. They were not just thinking 2 steps ahead. They were thinking 5, 10, and they were using the full potential of the simulator to outsmart him at every turn. It was a game of psychology, of manipulation, as much as it was one of tactics. Ilkar had underestimated the humans in the past, but now he could see the depth of their strategy. It wasn't just about firepower, speed, or precision. It was about pushing the limits of what could be done within the boundaries of a simulation and breaking those boundaries entirely. The realization hit him like a wave. If the Cathar were to survive in this new age of warfare, they couldn't simply rely on traditional tactics anymore. They would have to adapt. They would have to think like the humans, unpredictable, innovative, and willing to take risks that no one else dared to take. As the simulation continued, Ilkar felt a shift within himself. He was no longer the calm, calculating admiral who played the game of war with perfect precision. He was learning, evolving, and for the first time in his career, he was truly challenged. The humans had shown him a new path. A path that led away from the old ways of thinking and into the unknown. Ilkar wasn't sure if his fleet could ever fully replicate the human strategies. But one thing was certain. He would never view war the same way again. The battle raged on as Ilkar adjusted his strategy once more. He had learned a crucial truth. To defeat the human fleet, he could no longer rely solely on the Cathar's traditional methods. He would have to adapt, innovate, and embrace the chaos that had so disoriented him in the first place. But how could he do that? How could he mirror the human fleet's boundless creativity when it felt like every move was an experiment in real time? Ilkar set his mind to work. The Cathar were a species built on precision, on anticipating the moves of their enemies and neutralizing threats with ruthless efficiency. They did not excel in chaos. They excelled in control. But the humans were a different breed. They reveled in uncertainty. Every move, every maneuver, was a gamble. And yet, they somehow always seemed to land on their feet. As the next simulation began, Ilkar decided to throw caution to the wind. Instead of relying on his tried and true strategies, he ordered his fleet to embrace the unknown, just as the humans did. His fleet scattered across the battlefield in unorganized formations, forcing the simulator's AI to adapt alongside him. He pushed his ships to take risks, to break the rigid formations that had long been a hallmark of Cathar military tactics. He couldn't help but feel an unfamiliar rush as his ships weaved unpredictably through the battlefield. The Cathar had always been slow to embrace risk, but in this moment, Ilkar realized that he had no choice but to throw away the past and step into the future. The human fleet, though still unpredictable, was methodical in its chaos. Every human ship seemed to function as part of a greater whole, each movement timed with the others. Even in chaos, there was a kind of order, a pattern that Ilkar had missed before. He had been too focused on the precision of his own fleet to see it. The human fleet, led by Captain Cole, had already picked up on Ilkar's shift in tactics. They were no longer moving in a scattershot pattern. They began to form a cohesive response, using their unpredictability to throw off the Kthar's newly chaotic approach. It was almost as if they were daring him to keep up. Ilkar's mind buzzed with possibility. The human fleet didn't fight to outmaneuver. They fought to outthink. And right now, the simulator's AI was responding to both sides with incredible speed, adjusting its parameters at an astonishing rate to accommodate the increasing complexity of the battle. Ilkar could feel the tension building. And yet, for the first time since the simulation had started, he was no longer overwhelmed. He was exhilarated. He felt a deep sense of challenge, something he hadn't experienced in years. The simulation was no longer just a test of skill. It was a race to see who could push the boundaries of possibility the furthest. But there was still one critical thing Ilkar had to do. He had to stop playing into the humans' game of surprise, and instead force them into a trap of his own design. The human fleet, though creative and adaptive, still had one weakness. They thrived on unpredictability, yes, but they also relied on the freedom of movement, the space to operate. If Ilkar could constrain that freedom, he might be able to level the playing field. With a new clarity, Ilkar ordered his fleet to concentrate on surrounding the human ships, closing in from all sides. He watched as his ships moved into position, blocking off escape routes and cutting off possible avenues of attack. The human fleet tried to break free, scattering once again, but Ilkar had anticipated this. His ships tightened their encirclement, driving the humans into a corner of the battlefield. Captain Cole's fleet fought valiantly, but now, for the first time, they were struggling. They had been forced into a situation where they could no longer rely on their usual tactics. For a brief moment, Ilkar felt a flicker of triumph. His fleet was closing in, and the humans seemed to be running out of options. But just as Ilkar thought he had them cornered, something unexpected happened. The human fleet didn't retreat or falter. Instead, they regrouped in the most unlikely manner, using a technique Ilkar had never seen before. The human ships began to fire on each other, not in a destructive way, but as a coordinated series of decoys, creating fake signals that scrambled Ilkar's targeting systems. The Kthar fleet's locks failed, and suddenly, the humans had regained their freedom. They were, once again, weaving through his encirclement as if it had never existed. It was like nothing Ilkar had ever experienced. The humans had not only survived, they had outsmarted him in ways that defied his comprehension. The Admiral leaned back in his chair, staring at the chaotic battlefield on the screen, feeling both awestruck and frustrated. They were playing a different game, a game he was only just beginning to understand. Ilkar's mind was alight with both frustration and fascination. The humans had done it again, outmaneuvered him in a way he couldn't even fully comprehend. The way they used their own ships as decoys to scramble his fleet's targeting systems wasn't just innovative, it was genius. The Kthar had always prided themselves on their technological superiority, yet in the face of the humans' creativity, their machines seemed almost secondary. What the humans lacked in firepower, they made up for in sheer ingenuity. Ilkar took a moment to compose himself. His pride had been wounded deeply, but beneath that sting was something else, a growing respect for the human fleet, for Captain Cole, and for the unpredictable nature of the humans themselves. For the first time in his life, Ilkar realized that the greatest strength of the human fleet wasn't just their ability to adapt, it was their willingness to fail, to take risks, and to learn from those failures. They had no fear of making mistakes, because those mistakes were simply stepping stones toward success. He tapped a few keys, bringing up the simulation logs, and rewatching the moments when the human fleet turned the tables. It was then that a realization hit him. Each time the humans were pushed into a corner, they didn't panic. They didn't fall into the trap of traditional military thinking. They responded with instinct, with improvisation, and most importantly, with confidence in their own ability to think outside of the established rules. They turned each disadvantage into an opportunity. Ilkar stared at the data, trying to piece together how he could use the same unpredictable methods without abandoning everything that made the Cathar a powerful force. He understood now. The challenge wasn't in trying to match the humans' unpredictability move for move. It was about integrating their creativity into his own strategies, finding a way to fuse his tactical brilliance with the raw, chaotic ingenuity of the humans. With renewed determination, Ilkar issued new commands to his fleet. He wouldn't replicate the humans' tactics outright. Instead, he would embrace the core principle of their strategy: adapt and evolve in real time. It was time to stop being bound by the rigidity of Cathar doctrine. If his fleet was to succeed, they would have to think as the humans did, bending the rules of war rather than following them. The simulation began once again, and Ilkar approached it with a new mindset. This time, his fleet split into multiple smaller units, not according to the usual pattern of organized clusters, but in irregular groupings that seemed erratic at first glance. The ships moved in unpredictable directions, forcing the human fleet to respond in ways they hadn't anticipated. It wasn't a perfect strategy. Ilkar knew that, but it was a step toward something more flexible, more malleable. The humans reacted immediately. As expected, they scattered and began to chase down the weaker, isolated units. But this time, Ilkar had set a trap. As the humans advanced, he initiated a series of rapid reversals. Cathar ships that had appeared to be retreating suddenly turned and attacked with precision. The humans had been lured into a false sense of confidence, thinking they could simply outmaneuver the Cathar. But just as Ilkar thought he might have them, Captain Cole demonstrated exactly why the humans were so dangerous. The human fleet broke apart again, but this time they didn't try to regroup as they had earlier. Instead, they divided their forces into even smaller clusters, making it impossible for Ilkar's fleet to keep track of all of them. For every Cathar ship that targeted a human vessel, another human ship would launch a surprise strike from an unexpected angle. It was a dance of sorts, a chaotic, ever-shifting battlefield where no one could predict the next move. But for the first time, Ilkar felt he was keeping pace. His fleet was no longer rigid and inflexible. It had become fluid, shifting like the human fleet did. The Cathar were adapting. They were becoming more like their human adversaries. Ilkar's heart raced. This was it, the turning point. The humans had always relied on staying one step ahead by exploiting their flexibility, but now the Cathar were not far behind. The battlefield was no longer a place of rigid control. It was a place of creative solutions and calculated risks. As the simulation continued, Ilkar's fleet began to edge closer to victory. The humans still fought fiercely, but they had underestimated the Cathar's capacity for adaptation. It wasn't enough to be unpredictable. The humans had underestimated the Cathar's ability to innovate under pressure, and in that realization, Ilkar found the key to victory. He wasn't trying to outmaneuver the humans anymore. He was learning to outthink them in ways they had never expected. The gap between the two fleets narrowed. Ilkar could feel it. He was no longer just playing the game. He was beginning to redefine it. The battlefield was now a blur of shifting ships, sudden strikes, and unexpected movements. Ilkar's heart pounded as he guided his fleet through the chaos. The human fleet, though still unyielding, was showing signs of struggle. Captain Cole's ships had become less fluid, less confident in their chaotic maneuvers. Ilkar's strategy, disorganized, unpredictable, but controlled, was beginning to take shape. For the first time, he wasn't just reacting to the humans. He was making them react to him. The Cathar fleet had adapted to the humans' erratic style, bending the traditional rules of warfare without abandoning their core strengths. Ilkar knew it wasn't perfect. The Cathar could never replicate the raw, boundless creativity of the human fleet, but they didn't need to. They only needed to understand the core of what made the humans so formidable: their ability to improvise, to embrace chaos, and to constantly evolve in real time. Ilkar's fleet wasn't as unpredictable as the humans, but it had learned to be flexible, and that was enough. A new wave of attacks came from the human fleet, more frantic and less coordinated. Ilkar's fleet responded swiftly, exploiting the weakness that had emerged from the humans' desperate attempts to regain the upper hand. The human ships that had once darted through the battlefield with ease now found themselves cornered, their movements less fluid and more reactive. Ilkar seized the opportunity. His ships, moving in an irregular but calculated pattern, forced the humans into positions they hadn't expected. Every ship that tried to break free was immediately pressured from multiple angles. Captain Cole, for the first time, seemed to hesitate. His fleet was no longer the relentless force it had been at the start. Ilkar watched as the human ships struggled to maintain their advantage, their speed reduced as the Kthar fleet tightened the noose. It wasn't enough for Ilkar to simply win now. He needed to make a statement. He wasn't going to just defeat the humans. He was going to show them that their methods, while effective, could be countered with a new form of unpredictability. The Kthar had learned, and they had learned fast. Ilkar issued a final command to his fleet. It was a bold move, a near-complete deviation from their standard tactics. His ships surged forward in a final, unrelenting offensive, splitting into smaller units, just as the humans had done so often. But unlike the humans, the Kthar knew when to regroup, when to strike with precision. Each small unit acted as a decoy, pulling the human ships further into the trap. One by one, the human ships were caught off guard, their formations breaking apart as they tried to respond to each new threat. The decisive moment arrived when Ilkar's flagship, the Rorath, positioned itself at the heart of the battlefield, cutting off the last avenue of escape for Captain Cole's lead ship. The human fleet had nowhere left to retreat. Every potential move was blocked. The Kthar fleet moved in for the final strike, and this time, the humans didn't have the same creative escape route they'd relied on so many times before. Captain Cole's voice came over the comms, quieter now, filled with a level of grudging respect Ilkar hadn't expected. "You've adapted faster than we anticipated, Admiral. But I must admit, I didn't think the Kthar had this kind of flexibility in them." Ilkar watched as the human flagship finally slowed, the last of their fleet turning to face him. The simulation had entered its final moments. There was no way for the humans to escape. Ilkar didn't relish the victory. In fact, as he saw the human ships fall one by one, a sense of bittersweet realization washed over him. He had succeeded in beating them at their own game, but the cost was something that lingered in his mind. The Kthar were now playing a different kind of war, a war that required more than just strength and discipline. It required constant evolution, constant adaptation, and the humans had shown him how far they were willing to go to break the rules. As the last human ship was neutralized, the simulation ended. The AI voice called the battle to a close, but for Ilkar, the real battle had only just begun. He had beaten the humans, yes, but the deeper truth remained. The Kthar would have to change, and change rapidly, if they were to keep pace with this new kind of warfare. He had no illusions now. The next time the Kthar faced the humans, it wouldn't be a game. It would be a race to see who could adapt faster. And in that race, Ilkar was determined not to be left behind.